Burns. All right, so we have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. And we'd ask that we do one question for Professor Burns, one question for Professor Lewis, just to give them equal time to respond. So since Professor Burns just finished, if we have a question for Professor Lewis, and we'll give you about a minute and a half, but we'll be lenient again, just depending on how it's there. All right, so Professor Lewis, any questions? Yeah.
So you were talking about how the right to life constitutes the ability to live your life as you see fit, to make your own choices. And there are definitely circumstances, like within our society, people are definitely born into circumstances where that's something they don't always have the chance to do because they don't have, access to a good education, or they have to, work at a young age to support their family. They don't really have time to go out and pay money to get educated. And a lot of the function of government has been historically that they would provide services like public education that would help people break out of those circumstances. And the reason for that is that often these are not provided at such a low cost by charities. People don't have a natural incentive to do them, so they don't really form just from the free market. And in order to do those things, the government needs money, so it taxes people. And that works as something of redistribution of wealth. How do you, in your moral framework, how do you balance? Because it seems like a sort of use of force to, in some ways, or the government's supposed to defend those rights.
Could you get to the question?
Oh yeah, the government's supposed to defend those rights. So how do you balance the defending of the rights of people to live their life as they wish by giving them these opportunities, or at least helping them so they have these choices, with those of not taxing people and not taking them?
Good. There's two premises in your question that I disagree with. The first is that people have a right to things and that they're somehow determined and unable to advance if somebody doesn't give them stuff. I disagree with that. If you want to talk about somebody going to work at a young age and not having the money for college, that's me. I didn't go to college until I was 40. I didn't get my bachelor's until I was 40 years old. I worked a business career before that. I went to work in the factory, and at age 17, and I never thought that anybody owed me anything more than that. And I'm darn glad that somebody didn't claim that and convince me that they did, because they need some kind of award of the state right now. So I don't agree with that. That's a Marxist conception of freedom. Now, I'm not calling you a Marxist, but I'm saying that's a Marxist conception of freedom in the sense that if you don't have things, you're not free. And that does directly contradict, and you make your choice who's made the better case, the idea that you have a right to act to gain those things. The other thing, when you talk about balance, I'm not sure what you're balancing. Are you balancing the right of the burglar, the right of the shoplifter to take the candy bar with the right of the shopkeeper to sell it? I don't balance the initiation of force with the retaliatory use of force. I say the initiation of force is wrong, and the purpose of retaliatory force is to stop it. And the reason we institute a government is to take that force out of our hands, to delegate it to an authority which, properly speaking, should be working under a fundamental law and a legal framework. And so I simply don't buy the determinism implied by your question also, that if you're born poor, you're going to stay poor. There's just too many people that haven't done that, and there's too many people born rich who end up poor and miserable later.
Thank you. Do we have a question for Professor Burns? I saw a hand in the shirt guy.
Professor Burns, you talked about the distinct definition between liberty and freedom. Liberty is the absence of coercion of central authority, and freedom is the huge range of choices. Do you believe that these are endowed to everything? And as you refer to in your argument the government as an entity, do you think that other entities within the civilization and the social context should be endowed with these rights?
Well, here, first let me address the freedom. I don't have the freedom to be an NBA center. I'm sorry, I'm just not tall enough, and gravity is going to keep me from being able to dunk. Okay? So when I defined freedom, I was just talking about the ranges of choices available to people, and here I know that we have differences genetically, we have all sorts of endowments, but I'd like to address slightly the question of freedom and liberty and the like in much the fashion that John did. Okay, suppose that we have a situation where the government is run by the KKK and it kills some black kid's father. Does that black kid have a right to expect perhaps the people who paid for the government that supported this kind of an action, does that kid have a right to expect that that compensation would be made so that this kid can go to school and have an education? I think that is absolutely appropriate. There is here's another thing. I look out at this audience. I bet you that there isn't a single IQ here of less than 110. I think that the kinds of things that we're talking about work really well for smart people who can figure things out. I think that government might be needed to help those who are less able than we are.
Thank you. Do we have a question for Professor Lewis?
So you talk a lot about natural rights, and just as a disclaimer, actually, I'm an objectivist, and I'm very familiar with Rand's works. But you also talked about how the government does define certain rights for us, or at least abridge them in the context of living within the society. But somehow we hold this right to property as being almost more sacrosanct than our rights to live life as we choose, because we obviously do have limits on our ability to live as we choose within a society. As we're talking about, you never really addressed the concept of the bilateral rights. So I'm going to assume that you agree with that. So why then is property so much more sacrosanct than the rest? Where does it come from? I mean, if you look at it in terms of like investigating the tie, we can look at it, well, did he buy it legally? Yes, well, where did he get his money? And then if he got his money from all sorts of circumstances born into his IQ, what ultimately then was the source of his property, in which you can only argue the circumstance of his birth and his parent selection. So we kind of run into this problem of why, like, what are these property rights and why are they naturally endowed somehow?
Well, first off, I disavowed, I qualified, and if not disavowed, if I had more time to talk about it, I would actually disavow the concept of natural rights, because it implies an intrinsicism that rights are out there. Rights are moral principles determined by looking at your nature as an individual. So I didn't say that I supported natural rights in the way you put it. It's just too short to really discuss that. Listen, you said, we think this, we think that, we put this, we think all kinds of things. We're in a mixed economy. We're making a lot of mistakes. There's lots of people that see the government redistribute a quarter of the GDP and wish it should be half. There's lots of people seeing the government controlling today about 48%, almost one half of all healthcare dollars directly, and think that that should be 100%. We think a lot of things. The question is, what can we support morally by arguments grounded in reality and such that we might disagree with everybody else? Now, the right to property, in my view, is a fundamental right because it is an expression of our right to action. As far as some people being smarter, I'm glad they are. Because they're the people that create corporations and new business, new products. They're the people that created cancer treatments that are keeping people alive who would be dead 30 years old. I'm certainly glad there's a lot of people smarter than I am. And I don't think that they should be destroyed or have their property or their rights taken because they're smarter.